Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next in my series of March of the Machine Commander deck techs. I'm covering every legendary creature from the March of the Machine main set in no particular order, plus the extra legends from Mom Jumpstart and the special pre-release promos, and if there's interest, I may even do the non-face legends from the Mom Commander product. So if you have a request for a March of the Machine Commander you'd like to see me build, or a way you want to see me build them, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Rona, Herald of Evasion. Rona was a Tellarian artificer who became obsessed with Phyrexian lore. Her studies led to a fascination with Gix, a Phyrexian sort of demon who served Yawgmoth and who tempted and completed Mishra. Rona's excavation of the caves of Koilos led to her discovering Sheoldred, charred and ruined by her transport to Dominaria via the planar bridge. It was Rona who helped to rebuild Sheoldred, becoming sort of Mishra to Shelley's Gix. And for her service, she was completed and fused with a Phyrexian obliterator. Come on. She is presumed dead after a new Phyrexia was sealed off from the rest of the universe, but who can know what nefarious legerdemain wizards will invent for her to have done so that she remains alive next time we need to pull the Phyrexians back into the story. Anyway, I'm excited to share this deck with you, but before I do, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why they're such a cool card and what they can do in the command zone, or from the command zone maybe. So whatever they ask of me, I put 30 cards toward that. That's our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers just to clear the board if it needs it. Sometimes I'll do more, like in this case. Sometimes I do none at all. But I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands, so I can make sure I hit my land drops and I can cast my spells. So let's talk about our commander. Rona, Herald of Evasion is a 1/3 legendary human wizard for 1 and a blue. She's got 3 abilities. Whenever we cast a legendary spell, we untap her. We can tap her to draw a card and then discard a card, so to loot. And for 5 and a Phyrexian black, we can transform her as a sorcery. Again, that Phyrexian black can be paid with just black mana, or we can just pay 2 life and 5 generic. And when we transform her, she flips into Rona Tellarian Obliterator. She's a 5/5 legendary Phyrexian wizard with trample, and she's blue and black. And she says, whenever a source deals damage to Rona, that source's controller exiles a card from their hand at random. If it's a land card, we may put it on the battlefield under our control, otherwise we may cast it without paying its mana cost. So Rona has several cool things going on for her. She's a looter, for one, letting us draw and discard to fill our graveyard and find the cards we need. She untaps herself when we cast legends, presumably because she was always so starry-eyed over the stories of Dominaria's worst villains. And her backside is a Phyrexian Obliterator, which is both less of an innuendo than it sounds, and more dangerous than you'd think. As an Obliterator, Rona gives us access to random cards from our opponent's hands, letting us put lands into play or cast spells for free. We don't get to choose the card she gives us, instead trusting in our Phyresis that Gix will provide. It's a powerful ability with one fatal drawback. It requires our opponents to damage Rona when they know they'll lose a card in hand and we'll get it instead. I can already imagine Rona herself scoffing at the idea of cooperation from those who've yet to see the glory of Phyrexia, even in the form of harming her. And while I support women's wrongs, she's not wrong about that. So in her spirit, we do it ourselves. Rona doesn't say whenever a source an opponent controls, which means any damage we do to her allows us to play a random card from our own hand. There's no perfection without pain, so Rona gladly endures being pinged by burn spells in order to power out high-cost threats. We have big creatures, big enchantments, big sorceries, and a lot of value. And if that were all we had, it would certainly be enough for us. But not for Rona. She's seen the beauty that can only be achieved with veins full of glistening oil, so we don't content ourselves with simply throwing out big spells of our own. As easily as we loot cards into our own graveyard, we also have ways to mill our opponents and stock their yards with creatures we can reanimate for our own uses. And remember, Rona is a wizard, not just some necromancer, so we can also capture our opponent's creatures from the battlefield or even pluck them right out of their libraries. We cultivate the vibe of Phyrexian sleeper agents, spreading to every zone of play as our opponent's defeat seems as inevitable as their own card's betrayal. And the best part is, every time we do this, we don't know what we're getting. Rona's trigger gives us a random card from our hand or an opponent's, and our thievery spells are just as unpredictable to us. Our colors are all about control, but our commander cautions us against holding on to it. Instead, we submit to the ebb and flow of power, letting the current of the oil take us to victory. We give ourselves over to the might and essence of mechanical perfection, and entrust our future to the machine in which we're honored to be a cog. If we but surrender, victory will come to us in each game we complete. You'll enjoy this deck if you like running out big, splashy game pieces that make for unexpected plays and silly, surprising wins, or if you like the feeling that you're mildly cheating every time your deck does what it's meant to do. So as usual, this Moxfield list that we're going to go over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of that list, you will see a considering section that has a bunch of cards I thought about putting in the deck and ultimately decided not to, but it's a great place to start for inspiration if you want to build toward a larger budget or a smaller budget or a deck with a different focus when you build your own Rona Herald of Invasion deck. So we're going to start with not the spells that Rona wants to get out for us, but the spells that are going to get things out. This is our burn section. It's a bunch of cards that let us do damage directly to Rona, or, we can do these to other targets if we want to. But specifically, these are in the deck primarily for us to do damage to Rona to trigger the ability of her backside, without killing her, of course. We're going to start with a card from Cold Snap. This is Feast of Flesh. A single black for a sorcery gives us a card that says Feast of Flesh deals X damage to target creature, and we gain X life, where X is 1 plus the number of cards named Feast of Flesh in all graveyards. So in all likelihood, because this is a card that cares about the number of cards with its same name, people aren't running this in Commander. But what it is a 1 black sorcery that does 1 damage to a creature, and we gain a life, which isn't a whole lot, but it's fun to play a card that you don't get to see a lot. Cold Snap was a really neat set, and this is a single mana that lets us cast a random card from our hand, or play, I should say, because we might hit a land. We have ways to deal with that soon. But yeah, Feast of Flesh is really sort of an archetypal version of the card we want to play in this deck, and we have 14 others. Midnight Charm is one of them, from Planar Chaos. For a single black, we get an instant, so we can do this on our opponent's turn, that says choose 1. Midnight Charm deals 1 damage to target creature and you gain 1 life, so it's the same as Feast of Flesh, but at instant speed. Or target creature gains first strike until end of turn, or tap target creature. So I've tagged this as sort of an evasion ability, because we can maybe get an attack in without being blocked by a specific creature. If we've got that creature tapped down, we can also give ourselves first strike. But it's also true that for both of these second abilities, just like we can hit any target with this 1 damage, it doesn't have to be our commander, even though that's what it's in here for, we can give our opponent's creatures first strike, or we can tap down opponent's creatures when it's not our turn and we're not attacking them. We can use this politically. It's not the use that we put it in the deck for, but it can certainly help us sometime. For example, if we have 2 opponents attacking each other, and opponent B and opponent A are both blocking each other's, or there's a 4/4 being blocked by a 4/4 or something like that, we can say, hey, it looks like y'all have a trade going here, and then we turn to opponent A and say, I can save your creature if you'll ignore me for a turn cycle, or if you'll help me out with whatever I'm trying to do next, And if they're like, oh, well, okay, maybe that sounds all right. And if we do, we give their creature first strike, and now their creature gets to do damage to the other creature first, the other creature dies, and we've saved their creature. Or we could say, hey, I know it looks like opponent B has got too many blockers, but if I were to make it so that particular creature can't block, would you be willing to spend your attack going after them and maybe just leaving me alone for a while? If based on the behaviors of our opponents so far, that's probably not that hard of a sell. So we tap down a creature, they can attack, and it's fine. These are little ways that we can get incremental damage or an incremental advantage in a commander game, because politics is a thing. So we don't want to ignore those uses for cards like this. Next is Hermetic Study. This is an aura. 1 and a blue for an aura with enchant creature that gives that creature the ability to tap to do 1 damage to any target. It turns them into a Prodigal Sorcerer, which we'll talk about now as well. 2 and a blue for a 1/1 human wizard that taps to do 1 damage to any target. Just a classic card from way back in the day. So Prodigal Sorcerer and Hermetic Study are both in here for the same reason, to do 1 damage to Rona. And if we put Hermetic Study on Rona herself, which is fine for us to do, we can use Rona when she's on her backside to tap and do damage to herself, and it'll trigger it. So both of these are great for that reason, but we can also, of course, send that burn damage anywhere that we want to. So yeah, I should also mention, since this is an aura, we can enchant Rona with this, no matter which side of her is face up. And then if we have enchanted the front side and we transform her, she's not one of those cards that exiles herself and then returns to the battlefield transformed. She just transforms on the battlefield, so this aura will not fall off. So if we enchant her with Hermetic Study while she's face up, she will have 2 abilities that let her tap. One will be this one from Hermetic Study, and one will be the one that's already printed on her that lets us loot. So just a thought, if we have Hermetic Study in hand and the mana to cast it, but we don't yet have enough mana to flip Rona, we can go ahead and put it on Rona, and then once she flips, we can immediately tap. Because having transformed, Rona won't have summoning sickness. Next we have Plague Spitter, incredible chippy art. 2 and a black for a 2/2 Phyrexian Horror that says at the beginning of our upkeep, the Plague Spitter deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. Just does, including itself. Everything takes a damage. Every player, every creature. Which means we're going to get Rona triggers in our upkeep with the Plague Spitters in play. And when it dies, it does the same thing. So if our opponents are able to kill the Plague Spitter, and Rona survives whatever they've done to kill the Plague Spitter, so maybe not like a Wrath of God, but assuming that this death trigger goes in the stack, we're going to be able to hit Rona again, as well as ourselves and each other opponent and each other creature. So a really nice way to keep like X1s off the battlefield, like if someone's making a whole bunch of, elf tokens, Plague Spitter could keep them off the battlefield. Seems good. We've seen the Sorcerer. Now let's talk about a relatively recent card in Requiem Monolith. 1 and a black for an artifact with a tap ability that says, until end of turn, target creature gains. Whenever this creature is dealt damage, you draw that many cards and lose that much life. That creature's controller may have this artifact to deal 1 damage to it. Activate only as a sorcery. So essentially, Requiem Monolith lets us tap it, and if we target Rona, Rona is going to take 1 damage, because we will allow that. Rona will trigger whatever Rona's trigger says, but will also trigger this. We'll get to draw a card, since we did 1 damage to her, and lose 1 life. If we do any more damage to her that same turn, we'll draw that many cards and lose that much life. Any kind of damage that's dealt to her is going to trigger this, giving us plenty of cards in our hand, and costing us a little bit of life. What's nice about this is, when this damage is dealt to Rona, this ability is already on her, assuming we've targeted her with it. So doing that 1 damage is going to trigger both Rona's trigger and this one, and we can stack them however we want. Maybe we don't have any cards in hand. So we activate the Requiem Monolith, targeting Rona. Rona gains this highlighted ability, and then the Monolith does a damage to Rona. We'll let this triggered ability resolve first. We'll lose a life, draw a card, and now Rona's ability triggers, or resolves rather, and it lets us play whatever card we drew. But if we've done some scrying and we know that there's a land on top of our library, we still want to activate Rona with the Requiem Monolith, but we don't want to have the possibility of maybe the random card in our hand that we get to play with Rona's trigger is a land. So we have this ability resolve second. We get to do the damage to Rona, have something at random in our hand be able to be played by us, and then we'll draw a card and lose a life. So yeah, Requiem Monolith is really nice as an enabler in this deck. Next we have Thornwind Fairies, incredible Rebecca Gay art, love this stuff. For 2 and double blue, we have a 1/1 flyer that it's a fairy, and we can do the Prodigal Sorcerer thing with it. We can tap to do a damage to any target. Seems great. It's in here for the same reason as the Sorcerer and as Hermetic Study. And as Acorn Catapult. For 4 generic mana, we get an artifact that for 1 and tap, it will do 1 damage to any target, and then the controller of the permanent or player, or rather, we do 1 damage to any target. Either the person, the player we hit with that, or the permanent we hit, its controller, makes a squirrel. We get a 1/1 squirrel. We're paying a mana, tapping the catapult, doing a damage to Rona, making a squirrel, and then Rona's trigger goes on the stack. That's what we've got this here for. Next up is Dread Presence, a great card in any deck that's primarily black, like this one is. Even though we've got a little bit of an even split, it's more black than blue. For 3 and a black, we get a 3/3 Nightmare, which is relevant to one of our other cards, that says whenever a swamp we control enters, we either draw a card and lose a life, or Dread Presence will do 2 damage to any target and will gain 2 life. So we can turn our Swamp Fall triggers into draw, or we can do 2 damage to something and gain 2, which will get us the life back that we're losing from the draw triggers. This 2 damage can go to Rona because Rona's a 5/5. It's fine. I prefer to keep it down to just 1 point of damage if we can, but being able to trigger Rona at all is pretty great. So this is a good way to do it. Next is Enter the God Eternals. This is a fun card for this deck. 2 double blue and a black gives us a sorcery that says it deals 4 damage to target creature, and we gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. So it almost kills Rona, but not quite, and it will trigger her. In addition, target player mills 4 cards. Does not have to be the controller of whatever we did the 4 damage to. And we amass zombies 4. So we make a 0/0 zombie army token and put 4 counters on it. And I'm saying that rather than the opposite, which is if we already have any armies, we make it a zombie as well and put 4 counters on that, because this is the only way for us to amass in this deck. So Enter the God Eternals doesn't kill Rona, but it almost does, but it also mills someone, which we want. And we get a 4/4 out of it as well. Pretty nice. Next is Meteorite. Meteorite is a very expensive manalith. For 5 generic mana, it's an artifact that adds 1 mana of any color, and when it enters, it does 2 damage to any target. A great way for us to activate Rona and also have mana sitting around afterwards, or just to shock something. Ribbons of Night is next. I really like this card. 4 and a black for a sorcery that deals 4 damage to target creature, and we gain 4 life. Kind of a consistent theme. And if blue mana was spent to cast a spell, also draw a card. So as long as one of the 4 generic mana we pump into this was blue, we also get card draw off of it. It replaces itself in our hand. Next, for all you Wumpus lovers out there, it's Thrashing Wumpus. This is a 3/3 beast for 3 and double black that for a single black mana, but not a tap symbol, it does 1 damage to each creature and each player. So if we were to activate this at least 3 times, the Wumpus will die because it's included in each creature. But we can activate this multiple times, since it doesn't tap, in the same turn, getting Rona to activate, to trigger, I should say, each time we do, each time that damage is done to her. So yeah, the Wumpus can be really nice for us. Particularly if we're looking at it like this. Maybe we have a hand with 4 good cards in it. We can pay 4 black mana. We don't have to let each of the abilities resolve. We can just activate this 4 times, activating it once, holding priority, activating it again, holding priority, put 4 triggers on the 4 activations on the stack, I should say. And then they will all resolve. The Wumpus will die, but since all those activations are all on the stack, each ability will resolve. Rona will be, her ability will be triggered 4 times, and since we have 4 cards in our hand, all we care about is what order those cards go out. And since it's random, we don't get to choose, but we know we only have 4 cards in hand, so all of them are going to get to be cast or played. So yeah, the Wumpus is nice for that. Next is Endbringer. Endbringer is 5 and a colorless mana. So that's not 6 generic, this specifically has to be colorless, which is a little bit of a problem in this deck, but we can make do. We have several different ways of making colorless mana. This is a 5/5 Eldrazi that says untap it during each other player's untap step. So the Endbringer always starts every turn untapped. Then we can tap it to do 1 damage to any target, usually Rona. We can pay a specifically colorless and tap it, and target creature can't attack or block this turn. This is just repeatable pacifism. And pay 2 colorless, so tap our Soul Ring, and tap the Endbringer to draw a card. Lots of good value if we have our colorless mana available to us. But even if we don't have colorless mana available, Endbringer might just be in our hand, and we could probably play it with Rona. Then it enters the battlefield. We've got a 5/5 that's always untapped at the start of every turn, and that we can tap to trigger Rona whenever we need to. Finally, in this section, we have Pestilence Demon, an 8 mana mono black 7/6 demon with flying that has the same ability as the Wumpus. For a single black and no tap, it does 1 damage to each creature and each player. Pretty great. And a 7/6 flying body. That's pretty alright. So we've seen our burn spells. Now let's talk about our big spells. We've got 35 of them in this deck because we have a lot of overlap and things doing other work for us. I've said big spells is just all of our spells that cost 5 mana or more, something that we want to get out with Rona. So we're going to start with Black Market. We're doing a lot of damage, as you've seen, to every creature in play. So Black Market is a 3 and double black enchantment that says whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on this enchantment. It doesn't say a creature you control, it doesn't say a non-token creature. Just any creature dies, Black Market gets a charge counter. And at the beginning of our first main phase, we get to add a black mana for every charge counter on Black Market. So early on, this isn't doing much for us. After a few turns, it's going to be doing an awful lot. And it's going to be something that, if our opponents are clever, they will naturalize it or disenchant it or otherwise remove it. It'll give us too much for them to ignore. Next is Chainer Dementia Master, a 3/3 legendary human minion for a 3 and double black that gives all of our nightmares +1/+1. So the Dread Presence we saw earlier is a nightmare, so it's going to get a bonus from this. In addition, we can pay 3 black and 3 life to put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. It is black and is a nightmare in addition to its other creature types. What that means is it retains its types and gains nightmare as an additional one. It does not retain any other colors. It just is black. That's all it is. And when Chainer leaves the battlefield, exile all nightmares. So this is one of our theft cards. It's one of the cards we have in here so that if an opponent has gotten a creature into their graveyard, or if we have, then we can pay 3 mana and 3 life to get that creature into play under our control. It does not say activate only as a sorcery, so we can certainly do this in the middle of combat or on an opponent's turn. We can do it if someone says, oh, I'm running a Reanimator deck, so when my commander goes to the graveyard, I'm just going to leave it there. We probably don't want to do that because then it'll change zones again and they could move it to their command zone. But we could do something like, I'm going to cast this scam spell or like a Feign Death effect on one of their creatures that says when it goes to the graveyard, return it to the battlefield tapped or something. When that trigger goes on the stack, we can respond with Chainer and steal their creature out from under them. Just get it into play for our side. Or, of course, we could do it in the middle of combat and suddenly we have a surprise blocker and hopefully it's a big one. Seems good. If Chainer dies or otherwise leaves the battlefield, of course we exile all of these, but this is also a nice benefit because it means that the creature card goes away and our opponent's never getting it back. Either once it comes into play for us, if it dies, sure, it'll go back to their graveyard. But if Chainer dies, we exile that creature that came back since it is a nightmare, and our opponent won't be able to get it back. And of course, since it's a nightmare, while it's in play on our side, it gets +1/+1. So, that covers Chainer. What about Consuming Aberration, which amazingly they reprinted in Foundations? 3, a blue and a black, gives us a star horror with power and toughness each equal to the number of cards in opponents' graveyards. That means we add up all the cards in all of our opponents' graveyards. It also means that we don't want to cast the Consuming Aberration when none of our opponents have cards in their graveyards, because it will come in as a 0/0 and die. And then, whenever we cast a spell, any spell, doesn't even matter if we don't have to spend mana to cast it. Each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land, then puts those cards into their graveyard. That includes the land they revealed. So if it takes them 20 cards to get to a land, they just mill 20. And that's every time we cast any spell. Consuming Aberration is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger from that as well. So very nice. We've seen Enter the God Eternals and how it's pretty big, activates our commander, gains us a little life, gives us a 4/4, has someone mill 4. It could even be us if we want to mill 4. Next, a card that we've already made a deck for on this channel. Check out the video's description to see the deck I made for Jin-Gitaxias. This is just Jin-Gitaxias, no epithet. A 5/5 Phyrexian Praetor, legendary, for 3 and double blue. Jin has Ward 2, and a trigger whenever we cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, we draw a card. We're casting an awful lot of spells, thanks to Rona, and most of them have mana value 5 or greater. I mean, that's what this whole section is for big spells. So Jin is going to be drawing us a whole bunch of cards. But we can also do the kind of transformation for Jin that we don't do with Rona, which is to say 3 and a blue lets us exile Jin, then return it to the battlefield transformed under our control, but only as a sorcery and only if we have 7 or more cards in hand. May not always be the case for us, but a 5/5 with Ward 2 that draws us all these cards is pretty good on its own. And if we do get to flip Jin over, we get a Saga, the Great Synthesis. The first, if you haven't seen a Saga before, the way they work is this. They get lore counters when they enter and at the start of our pre-combat main phase. So when this comes in, it will get a lore counter, and we'll be able to trigger this ability on Chapter 1. Start of our next pre-combat main phase, we'll get a second one, and we'll trigger the second chapter. The turn after that, at the start of our pre-combat main phase, we'll put a third lore counter on it, and once this last trigger is done resolving, normally we would sacrifice the Saga, and it's just gone. Except that this trigger has us exile it and return it to the battlefield face up. So here's what it does. When it first flips over, it gets its first lore counter, and we draw cards equal to the number of cards in our hand, and we have no maximum hand size for as long as we control this Saga. Then the next time, we will bounce all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hands. Everything just bounces. That'll be a bunch of our stuff, but it won't be Rona if Rona's on her backside. And then we can cast any number of spells from our hand without paying their mana costs. That is why it doesn't matter that we bounced all of our creatures. We can just cast them again on the next turn. And then it says, exile this Saga and return to the battlefield, front face up. We'll get Jin again. What's great is, this whole ability resolves. We can cast any number without paying their mana cost, then exile this Saga and return to the battlefield. So that we just cast all those things, probably draw a bunch of cards. Seems pretty good. We've seen Meteorite and how it costs 5 mana, but it gives us a mana back, and it does 2 damage to something, which means we can trigger our commander with it. Next we have Mirko Vosk, Mind Drinker, originally from Dragon's Maze. I think maybe only from Dragon's Maze. Yep, basically. For 3 a blue and a black, we get a 2/4 flying legendary vampire. Remember, legends are important because they untap Rona's front side. And whenever Mirko Vosk deals combat damage to a player, that player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal 4 land cards, then puts those cards into their graveyard. It says those cards. It does not mean the 4 land cards. It means all the cards they revealed until they had revealed 4 land cards. All of that gets milled. So rather than just milling until they hit a land, like Consuming Aberration, they have to mill until they've hit 4 lands, which might be the first 4 cards in their library, but it might be, who knows, 20, 30, 40 cards in. Feel bad for them if they're not running enough lands to see them earlier than that, but still, Mirko Vosk, very nice for milling our opponents. Next we have Oscar, Rubbish Reclaimer, originally from New Capenna Commander. 3 a blue and a black for a 3/3 legendary human wizard that costs 1 less for each different mana value among cards in our graveyard. And remember, our commander is a looter. We can get cards in our graveyard. And whenever we discard a non-land card, perhaps from looting, we may cast it from our graveyard. So that is part of this triggered ability. We can't cast it until end of turn. We have to cast it right when we discard it. But if Oscar's in play, and we loot away something that we could otherwise cast with Rona, we could cast it right away, because Oscar will trigger and we get to cast it as part of the resolution of this second ability. That means if we're looting away a land, however, we can't play it because this says cast, not play. Next, we've seen Ribbons of Night, pretty good to activate our commander and, maybe draw a card. We've seen the Wumpus, lets us, trigger our commander and hurt every creature and player. Next, we have Yawgmoth's Vile Offering with incredible Chase Stone art. This is a wonderful part of the story and also just really beautiful. 4 and a black for a legendary sorcery, which means we can't even cast it unless we have a legendary creature or planeswalker in play. Luckily, our commander is a legendary creature, so we're often going to be able to cast it. What it does is we put up to 1 target creature or planeswalker from a graveyard onto the battlefield. That means it doesn't have to be our graveyard, under our control. And we destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. Then we exile Yawgmoth's Vile Offering. So we don't get to destroy the thing first and then reanimate it. We just get to reanimate something first and then destroy something. So we're up a creature and another opponent is down a creature. Seems pretty good. Next is Archetype of Imagination. 4 and double blue for a 3/2 enchantment creature human wizard. So another wizard, but it's also an enchantment. It says, creatures we control have flying, so now all of our creatures fly. Creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. So that means, unless our opponents have reach, they can't block any of our creatures. That seems pretty great. I know you're thinking, but we want them to block Rona. No, we're going to take care of damaging Rona on our own. We've seen the Endbringer, who can do that for us, among other things. Now we have Extravagant Replication, which they reprinted in Foundations. 4 and double blue for an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of another target non-land permanent you control. Just 1 Ether Tiger? What do I look like, a peasant? Extravagant Replication is expensive, but it absolutely gets out of hand if we have powerful things in play. Obviously, we don't want to duplicate our commander with this because the legend rule will come into play and we'll have to sacrifice either the copy or the original. But we can certainly get out an extra Archetype of Imagination or another Wumpus. That would be kind of crazy. Or maybe another Grave Titan. That seems good too. Grave Titan is 4 and double black for a 6/6 giant with Death Touch, and when it enters or attacks, we make 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Just a big horrible thing that makes some smaller horrible things. They're just falling out. It's gross. Imagine having 2 of those and then getting an extra one every turn when Extravagant Replication triggers. Next up is Infernal Genesis from Prophecy. 4 and double black for an enchantment that says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player mills a card, then they create X 1/1 black minion creature tokens, where X is that milled card's mana value. We have so many cards with high mana values that Infernal Genesis is likely to give us more of these 1/1 minions than anyone else, which is pretty sweet. Especially if we have something like Black Market in play, and then we activate the Thrashing Wumpus. We kill off everyone's minions, and we get 1,000,000 of these Black Market triggers in the process. Pretty nice. In any case, having a whole bunch of tokens seems pretty good. But what if they fly? Shark Typhoon is an enchantment for 5 and a blue that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is that spell's mana value. We get a whole bunch of variable cost and therefore variable power and toughness flying shark tokens, which is great because we're running 22 creatures in our library. So that means we've got, 40 non-creature spells, which includes the Shark Typhoon, so 39 of our spells are going to make us a shark. We can also cycle Shark Typhoon, meaning while it's in our hand, we can pay X 1 and a blue and discard it and draw a card. And when we do, we make one of those sharks where its power and toughness is the X. If we want, we can just cycle this for 1 and a blue, X equals 0. We will still draw a card and we will still make a shark, but it will be a 0/0 and it will die immediately. But we can do that if we are desperate for a card. It's worth just spending the 2, the 1 and a blue and discarding Shark Typhoon if we're really in need of something else. Next we have another Eldrazi. It's Sire of Stagnation. 4, a blue and a black, gives us a 5/7 Eldrazi with Devoid, which means, if it's ever relevant, this card is not blue and black. It's colorless. We still have to cast it for blue and black mana, but it doesn't have a color, in case it matters. And whenever a land an opponent controls enters, that is, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library, and we draw 2 cards. So this is not super relevant to us. It's sort of like mill, but we don't have access to it. But maybe with the rest of our mill, it will become relevant. Maybe it's just annoying. This, however, is pretty great. Every time someone plays a land, or has a land enter, whether they played it as part of their land drop for the turn, or they cultivated or rampant growth or explosive vegetation into it, whatever it may be, each of those lands that enters draws us 2 cards. That seems like that's pretty sweet. I mean, how many times does that have to happen for us to have gotten our money's worth out of this? I think twice, probably. Maybe even just once, if we can think of it as a 6-drop 5/7 blocker that drew us 2 cards once, and maybe ate a removal spell. Yeah, I think maybe just having it happen once is worth it, but definitely 2 times. Next, from the Assassin's Creed set, is Staff of Eden Vault's Key. For 6 generic mana, we get a legendary artifact, which is, again, legendary, just like Yawgmoth's Vile Offering is. Legendary, so it's important, since it will untap Rona's front side. When the staff enters, we put target legendary permanent card, not named Staff of Eden Vault's Key, from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So we probably want to cast this when there's a legendary permanent in someone's graveyard. It doesn't have to be our graveyard, but it does have to be a legendary permanent card, because otherwise we're paying 6 mana and we're not getting to reanimate anything. However, we also can tap it to draw a card for each permanent we control but don't own. So if we're casting it, we want to time it right. But we can't always time it properly with Rona, because we're getting to play a random card from our hand when her ability triggers, if we've damaged her. But we have lots of ways to steal other people's stuff, including this first trigger. So being able to draw cards for that repeatedly, just for tapping it, that seems pretty great. Next, we're running Wound Reflection, and we're using the Doctor Who art because it is the cheapest. For 5 and a black, we get an enchantment that says at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the amount of life they lost this turn. So any amount of damage they've already taken, any amount of life they've paid or lost in any other way, at the end of each turn, beginning of each end step, whatever life they've lost, they lose again. So we're doubling it, we just have to wait till the end step. Wound Reflection is a great card to move the game along. It doesn't affect us, just our opponents, and it also draws people's ire. If they have some kind of removal spell that can hit enchantments, they're probably going to use it on Wound Reflection. Which means, great, they're not using it on something else that we like more. Like maybe Extravagant Replication, which maybe has made a second copy of Wound Reflection. Just saying. Next up is Arvinox, the Mind Flail. Originally, Universes Within version of one of the Stranger Things cards. Anyway, it's a 9/9 legendary enchantment creature, horror. It's a horror, you might care about that, for 4 and triple black. Arvinox is not a creature, however, unless we control 3 or more permanents we don't own. That means it will still be a legendary card, and it will still be an enchantment. It just won't be a creature or a horror until we control 3 things we don't own. And at the beginning of our end step, we exile the bottom card of each opponent's library face down. For as long as those cards remain exiled, which is to say the rest of the game, we can look at them, cast permanent spells from among them, and spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So, a couple things to note about this. This is not perfect mana fixing, because it says we can spend mana as though it were mana of any color. But what if we exile a Soul Ring? Well, we can't use mana as colorless mana, because mana of any color, colorless is not a color. So we would actually need colored mana to cast a spell with colorless pips in it, like Soul Ring, or like our Endbringer, for example. So it's worth recognizing that if it has a generic mana cost, we can cast it anyway. If it has colored mana costs, we treat those colored mana pips like they were generic. But if it has actual colorless pips, we have to actually pay colorless for them. And we can only cast permanent spells from among these cards. That's pretty good. I mean, we're getting 3 cards, assuming 3 opponents, at the end of every turn. And we're able to cast those for as long as they're exiled, even if Arvinox leaves the battlefield. But it does say permanent spells from among them. So that means we can't cast any sorceries or instants, and since we don't have a way to cast things at instant speed, at flash speed, we're going to have to wait till our next turn to do so. But it's a good way for us to get some permanents that we control but don't own to make Arvinox into this 9/9 beast that we want him to be. Next is Breach the Multiverse. Played this in Standard. It is painful. For 5 and double black, we get a sorcery that has each player mill 10 cards. That includes us. And for each player, including us, we choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard. It does not have to be one that was milled by Breach the Multiverse. We put those cards onto the battlefield under our control, and then each creature we control becomes a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So, pretty nice if we care about Phyrexians, which, with Jin-Gitaxias, if we're able to flip him, we do. It means we don't have to bounce any of our creatures, since all of them are Phyrexians. Assuming we were able to breach the multiverse into Jin-Gitaxias flipping, yeah, it's we're probably already winning at that point. But yeah, breach the multiverse, very strong as a way to mill each of our opponents and put good things in their graveyards, and then just take some of them. Next is Curse of Unbinding, originally from Midnight Hunt Commander. For 6 and a blue, we get a Curse aura, which enchants a player. We choose an opponent, and that opponent is enchanted by this curse. And then it says at the beginning of each of the enchanted player's upkeep, that player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. We get to put that card on the battlefield under our control, and they put the rest of the revealed cards into their graveyard. So instead of milling their way into a land like we've seen already, they mill their way into a creature, and then we get that creature immediately. It just happens during their upkeep every turn. Pretty sweet. This is really annoying, especially since it only hits one of our opponents. But what are they going to do? Spend removal on this enchantment that's making them mill and giving us free creatures from their deck, but otherwise is not advancing our game plan? Yeah, let them use their removal spell on that. Next is Grave Betrayal, another enchantment, this one from Return to Ravnica. For 5 and double black, we have an enchantment that says whenever a creature we don't control dies, return it to the battlefield under our control, with an additional +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. So we don't get it immediately when it dies. It goes to the graveyard, and we wait until the next end step. At that point, we have a delayed trigger that will return any creatures that we didn't control that died that are still in the graveyard. We'll return them to the battlefield with a counter on them under our control. So the players that controlled, or owned rather, those creatures do have a chance to do something with them while they're in the graveyard. But if they make it to the end step and they don't respond to this trigger, we're going to get those creatures. Next is one of my favorite sagas of all time, Kiora Best's The Sea God. 5 and double blue for a saga that, on its first chapter, makes an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. The second one is tap all non-land permanents on target opponent controls, and they don't untap during their controller's next untap step. It's as though they have stun counters on them, which means one of our opponents is wide open. Unless they got a chance to play creatures before someone attacks them, they don't have anything to block with, which means everyone at the table can swing in, hopefully, to kill them. And if that's not the case, or even if it is, Chapter 3 is gain control of target permanent and opponent controls and untap it. Does not have to be the same permanent, one of the permanents that we tapped down. Doesn't have to be the same, a permanent controlled by the same opponent that we tapped all the things down. We can just do whatever we want with this. But we get to steal something for our third chapter ability after tapping everything down, after making a really big blocker attacker. Pretty great. Also, the story behind Kiora Best the Sea God, the fiction for it, look it up. It's fantastic. Next is Mind's Dilation. Isn't it funny that we're on a 7 mana enchantment and we've got at least 6 more cards to go? Mind's Dilation is 5 and double blue for an enchantment that says whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, so that's on each of their turns, but also any spells they cast on their opponent's turns, which might be our turn. That player exiles the top card of their library, and if it's a non-land card, we can cast it without paying its mana cost. So every time an opponent casts a spell, if it's the first spell they cast that turn, they lose the top card of their library, and if it wasn't a land, we can go ahead and cast it for free. Seems great. This is really nice because it lets us steal random cards from our opponents, and we sort of haven't whiffed if we hit a counterspell or something. Because we can have that counterspell probably target that first spell that they cast, since that spell is still in the stack when Mind's Dilation resolves. Really sweet. Next is Virtue of Persistence. This is an adventure card. So the way this works is Virtue of Persistence is an enchantment for 5 and double black that says at the beginning of our upkeep, we put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. It doesn't have to be our graveyard, it can be anyone's. We can steal any creatures that are dead and they become ours. Sounds good. But it also has this adventure. It's a sorcery for 1 and a black called Lochthwain's Scorn, which gives target creature -3/-3 until end of turn, and we gain 2 life. The way this works is, while this card is in our hand, we can either play it as the enchantment for 5 and double black, and then we just ignore the adventure. Or we can play it as Lochthwain's Scorn, the adventure, and after it has resolved, the card will go into exile, and we can cast the enchantment portion of it from exile, as though it were in our hand. So if we cast the enchantment first, we don't get the adventure. But if we cast the adventure first, the enchantment remains available to us. In this deck, it's kind of a question as to which way we want to do this. It's really nice to be able to have the flexibility to cast a 2-mana removal spell early on, and then from exile cast a 7-mana Reanimate spell later. But we want to try and get things out using Rona's ability, and if we've cast Lochthwain's Scorn, Virtue of Persistence is no longer in our hand. It's waiting in exile, what we call the adventure zone, kind of. So Rona can't cast it for free for us, so we would have to pay for it later in the game, which maybe is okay, but it's a very powerful ability, and I almost would say, unless we really need to use this removal ability, we probably should hold on to it in our hand, hoping that Rona can get it out as its full-powered side. But it depends on the game you're playing. Next, from a recent Tarkir Dragonstorm Commander set, it's Afterlife from the Loam. 5 and triple black for a sorcery, but it has Delve, which means if we're going to hard cast this, we can exile cards from our graveyard to pay for 1 generic mana per card we exile. So if we've milled some cards of our own, maybe some lands, maybe some non-creature spells, that we don't have a large chance of getting back, we can put them to use with Afterlife from the Loam. Or, of course, if this happens to be the random card we get to cast when Rona triggers, we don't have to worry about all that. But what does it do? For each player, choose up to 1 target creature card in that player's graveyard. Put those cards on the battlefield under your control. They're zombies, in addition to their other types. So, every player, that includes us, hopefully there's creatures in everyone's graveyard, and if we've got 3 opponents, that means we get 4 creatures for 8 mana, or maybe 0 mana if Rona did this for us. Pretty good. Next up is Aminatu's Augury. This is an 8-mana sorcery, 6 and double blue, for a sorcery that says we exile the top 8 cards of our library. We may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield, and until end of turn, for each non-land card type, we can cast a spell of that type from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. So that means if we have 2 enchantments among these 8 cards we've exiled, we don't get to cast both of them, because both of those are the same card type. But if we have an enchantment and an enchantment creature, we can cast both of those, because we're casting the enchantment creature as our creature from these cards, and the non-creature enchantment as our enchantment. That just means we wouldn't be able to cast any other creatures or enchantments, since we cast those. But at least it lets us also put a land in play, so it technically ramps us. Pretty nice. I like Aminatu's Augury. Next up is Archon of Cruelty. 6 and double black for a 6/6 flying Archon that says whenever this creature enters or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker of their choice, discards a card, and loses 3 life. We draw a card and gain 3 life. So the Archon draws us a card. It it removes 2 of our opponent's cards, 1 from their hand, 1 from the play, and we lightning helix them. Seems pretty good. One with the multiverse is next. We sure could be running Omniscience in this deck, but I would rather run something a little bit cheaper and I think more fun. From the Brothers' War, One with the Multiverse is 6 and double blue for an enchantment that lets us look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can play lands and cast spells from the top of our library, so that's card advantage right there. And once during each of our turns, we may cast a spell from our hand or from the top of our library without paying its mana cost. We have a lot of really big, expensive things in this deck, including One with the Multiverse itself, so the ability to play those out of our hand so that we don't have a chance of maybe getting them with Rona and Rona's trigger, or just playing them off the top of our library in order to try and get ourselves farther down into our library, sounds really great. We've seen the Pestilence Demon, a 7/6 flyer for 8 that lets us pay a black to do 1 damage to each creature and player. Seems good. Next, Storm-Tide Leviathan. Love this card. 5 and triple blue for an 8/8 Leviathan with Island Walk, which means if any of our opponents have islands that they control, Storm-Tide Leviathan can't be blocked when it attacks those opponents. Or, I'm sorry, it can't be blocked as long as the defending player controls an island, which means even if we attack that player's Planeswalker, they're still not able to block the Leviathan because they are still the defending player, even if they aren't themselves the one being targeted. Also, the Leviathan makes all lands into islands in addition to their other types, so it is just unblockable because it's going to be attacking every land, and every land is, or any player that has lands, and if they have lands, they have islands. And creatures without flying or island walk can't attack. So the Storm-Tide Leviathan actually protects us as well, unless our opponents have flyers or, I guessed, island walkers. They can't attack us. However, this also applies to us. We can't attack with anything that isn't a flyer or an island walker. Luckily, we're running quite a few flyers in this deck, and a couple of cards, like Archetype of Imagination, that make all of our creatures into flyers. So the Leviathan, doing a good job for us. Next, I have to run this card. Love this card. It's Rise of the Dark Realms. They reprinted it in Foundations. It's 7 and double black for a sorcery that takes every creature in every graveyard, and they all come into the battlefield under our control. We get everything. We get everything. This is the best payoff in the deck for all the milling we're doing to our friends and to ourselves. So any creature that isn't, that's in a graveyard, we get it. Costs 9 mana unless we're using Rona's ability to cast it for free, in which case, maybe that's good game. Finally, It That Betrays. A great card for us to get out somehow for free, because it's 12 mana. This is an 11/11 Eldrazi with Annihilator 2, meaning when it attacks, defending player sacrifices 2 permanents of their choice. Those could be tokens, those could be lands. Anything that's a permanent, they have to sacrifice 2 of them when It That Betrays attacks. And whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent, we put that card onto the battlefield under our control. We have several other ways to make our opponents sacrifice things. For example, we've seen Archon of Cruelty do that. They have to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. And It That Betrays, even though this came out much earlier than Kaldheim, it's doing a good impression of Turgid in this way. Any sacrifices that weren't tokens, we get to take. Seems pretty great. So that covers our big spells, and therefore most of the things in our game plan. We're going to talk about all the supplemental cards that will supplement this game plan, but first I want to talk about these support categories. We're going to look at what we've got here, starting with card advantage, which, as usual, I have shorthanded tagged as draw. That doesn't mean all of these cards draw as cards, even though they may. It just means that this is the section that, as shorthand, we're calling card advantage. So we're starting with Wizard class. This is a level up enchantment, a class enchantment, which means it comes in and it has this ability. At sorcery speed, we can pay the cost to level up to level 2, and then it will have level 1 and level 2 abilities. And once it is level 2, we can, at sorcery speed, pay this cost and level it up to level 3, and now it has all of these abilities. At level 1, it gives us no maximum hand size. At level 2, it becomes level 2 and we draw 2 cards. And then at level 3, whenever we draw a card for any reason, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control. So nice way to get a little bit of card advantage, to make it so we don't have to discard things if we don't want to, if our hand gets too big, which is not likely with Rona, but you never know. And to make our creatures bigger in case we need them to be bigger. I mean, you know, having Rona as a 5/5 trample is pretty good, but do you know what's better than a 5/5 trample? Anything bigger than that. Mind Stone is next. Normally, this is just a ramp spell, but it also gives us the ability to pay 1, tap, and sack it to draw a card. But what it normally does, what we care about, is that it's a 2-mana rock that taps for colorless mana. It's an artifact that we can accelerate ourselves with. We'll see it in the acceleration section. Next up is Vohar Vodalian Desecrator. For a blue and a black, we get a 1/2 legendary Phyrexian Merfolk Wizard. So very similar to Rona's whole deal, in that we can tap Vohar to draw and discard. That's another looter. And if we discarded an instant or sorcery this way, each opponent loses a life and we gain 1 life. This is not going to come up that often, but you never know. We can also pay 2 and sacrifice Vohar, and we can cast an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard this turn. And if it would be put into our graveyard, we exile it instead, activate only as a sorcery. So essentially 2 and sacrifice Vohar to flashback an instant or sorcery. So we still have to pay to cast it. So Vohar is here to help us in several different ways. Next up is Requiem Monolith. We've already seen Requiem Monolith, but it draws us cards. It's pretty nice. Dread Presence we've seen as well. We can, when we have Swampfall, we can draw a card and lose a life. We haven't seen the Sad Robot. We gotta talk about the Sad Robot. Solemn Simulacrum is a 2/2 artifact creature golem for 4 generic mana. When it enters, we Rampant Growth. We search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Pretty good. And when it dies, we can draw a card. Seems nice. A little bit of ramp, a little bit of card advantage. Great. Next is Teferi's Ageless Insight. 2 and double blue for a legendary enchantment. It's another legendary permanent that says if you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So, for example, if we activate the tap ability on our commander's front side, we draw 2 cards and discard 1, rather than drawing 1 and discarding 1. The same is true if we activate the loot ability on Vohar, draw 2 and discard 1. So yeah, Teferi's Ageless Insight doesn't do anything for us on its own, but anytime anything else lets us draw cards that aren't the first card we draw on our draw step, we'll get twice as many. We've seen Jin Cataxius. Jin Cataxius will draw us cards every time we cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater. We've seen Oscar, and Oscar lets us cast spells of the cards that we discard from our graveyard. Ribbons of Night, if we spend blue mana to cast it, we get to draw a card. Endbringer lets us draw a card if we pay 2 colorless mana into it and tap it. Sire of Stagnation, of course, draws us 2 cards every time our opponents play land or have land enter the battlefield. Staff of Eden can draw us cards for each permanent we control but don't own. Mind's Dilation lets us have cards off of the top of our opponent's libraries, assuming they're not lands, every time those opponents cast a spell for the first time each turn. Aminatu's Augury, of course, gives us access to the top 8 cards of our library, and we get to cast a spell of each type, and also put a land from among them onto the battlefield. Archon of Cruelty, when it enters or attacks, we get to draw a card, in addition to a bunch of other good stuff. And One with the Multiverse gives us access to the top card of our library, which is like having 1 more card in hand. That covers all of our card advantage spells. Let's take a look at our acceleration, which, again, as usual, I've just tagged ramp as a shorthand. So everyone knows Soul Ring. It costs 1. It's an artifact that taps for 2 colorless. You want to run Soul Ring, it's too powerful not to. We're also running Training Grounds, which is a specific kind of acceleration for us. For a single blue, we get an enchantment that says activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 generic mana less to activate. This can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. So this means activating Rona's transformation ability. Instead of paying 5 and a Phyrexian black, we only have to pay 3 and a Phyrexian black, which means we get Rona transformed much sooner. Very nice for us. Plus, we have plenty of other abilities that have cost associated with them. And so Training Grounds will reduce those costs by 2 generic mana. Another auto-include is Arcane Signet. It's a 2-mana rock that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, so it taps for blue or black. Pretty good for us. We're running Jet Medallion, which is a 2-mana artifact that makes all of our black spells cost 1 generic mana less to cast. We don't have to tap it for this, but it doesn't discount the colored mana. It just discounts the generic mana costs of any of our black spells. But that does include any spells that are both black and blue, so pretty nice. We've seen Mind Stone. It taps for colorless. We've got a Pearl Medallion as well. It's exactly the same as Jet Medallion, except that it affects white spells, and it costs like half as many dollars. Talisman of Dominance is one of the Talisman cycle. It's a 2-mana rock that taps for colorless, or we can tap it for blue or black if we're willing to have it do 1 damage to us. The way this normally plays out is that we're usually tapping it for colorless. We normally have plenty of lands to be able to make our colored mana, but if we really need an extra colored pip, it's worth doing 1 damage for those few times that it comes up. And even if we're taking 5 or 6 damage over the course of a game from Talisman of Dominance, that was worth it to us, to get a little bit of acceleration and also some mana fixing. Next is a pretty new card. It's Bender's Waterskin. This is a Manalith, which is to say a 3-mana artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color, but it also says untap this artifact during each other player's untap step. So we can make mana on everyone's turn, including our own, and not be out that mana for the rest of the turn cycle. Bender's Waterskin is great for us to activate abilities on our creatures or our permanents, to cast spells that we didn't think we'd otherwise get to cast. Pretty good. We've seen the Sad Robot. It, of course, comes in and Rampant Growths us. We've seen Black Market. At the beginning of each pre-combat main phase, we get to add a black mana to our pool based on the number of counters it has on it, which were themselves based on, every creature that's died since it came in. Meteorite is also a rock that taps for 1 mana of any color. Aminatu's Augury, when we exile those top 8 cards of our library, we can put a land into play from among them. So that's acceleration. And then, of course, One with the Multiverse lets us accelerate because we can play lands from the top of our library, which is technically just another form of card advantage, but nice to be able to do. So that covers our acceleration section. Let's look now at our interaction, which again I've just shorthanded as removal. Feast of Flesh, we're going to see a lot of these cards. This is a large number because a lot of these cards are doing double duty because they're burn spells. Feast of Flesh does 1 damage in our deck, as does Midnight Charm, to a creature for Midnight Charm, and to a creature for Feast of Flesh. Just want to check with these older cards to make sure they haven't been errated to be creature or planeswalker or any target. Next is Feed the Swarm. 1 and a black for a sorcery that destroys a creature or enchantment an opponent controls, and we lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. This is in here as our enchantment removal in the deck, but we can hit creatures with it as well. We've seen Hermetic Study. We can tap the enchanted creature to do damage to any target, or we can tap our Prodigal Sorcerer to do 1 damage to any target, or Requiem Monolith. It's not probably really removal, but it's possible that if we say, hey, I see you have an X1 and you're desperate for card draw, I will use Requiem Monolith on your X1, and you can have Requiem Monolith do 1 damage to that creature so you can draw a card. It's not likely to happen, but it's a possibility. Next is Soul Shatter. 2 and a black for an instant that makes each opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures or planeswalkers they control. So Soul Shatter is a great way for us to steal cards if we have the creature that lets us take our opponent's sacrificed non-tokens, which is if it betrays, of course. We've seen the Thornwind Fairies. Just like the Prodigal Sorcerer, it taps to do damage to creatures and players, which is to say any target. So we can hit planeswalkers with this. We can hit battles with this if we wanted to. Dread Presence. It will do 2 damage and we gain 2 life when we have Swamp Center. Enter the God Eternals does 4 damage to a creature, and we gain that much life as part of all the rest of the things it does. Meteorite shocks something, any target. Ribbons of Night does 4 damage to a creature, and we gain 4 life. Just a creature, though. just a creature. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering just straight up destroys a target creature or planeswalker, as well as reanimating a creature or planeswalker from someone's graveyard. Endbringer lets us, again, do 1 damage to any target if we tap it. Virtue of Persistence, the Lochthwain's Scorn sorcery, lets us give a creature -3/-3 until end of turn. Archon of Cruelty has an opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker and discard a card, and It That Betrays has Annihilator 2, which is not targeted removal, but it's still getting things out of here, and it's maybe getting them under our control, so that's pretty nice too. That's our interaction section. We also have 4 cards that count as Wraths, and we've seen all of them. Thrashing Wumpus and Pestilence Demon both do damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or each creature and each player rather, based on the number of times we activate that ability, which can of course kill these creatures too, but it may not. Plague Spitter does that same kind of damage, 1 to each creature and each player at the beginning of our upkeep and when it dies, so a very small wrath, but a possible one. And Jin-Gitaxias, of course, on the backside, can bounce all non-Phyrexian creatures if we get to that chapter. So that covers our Wraths. Let's take a look now at all the sections of supplement for our game plan, which we have some cards we haven't seen, but most of them we have. I will mention that we have a section of legends in this deck. I've just tagged every card that happens to be legendary, might be relevant to us if you want to build toward more legendaries in the deck so that we can do more looting with the front side of our commander. It's a possibility. But we're going to actually talk about these mill cards. The mill section starts with Mind Funeral. 1, a blue and a black, for a sorcery that says target opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until 4 lands are revealed. That player puts all cards revealed this way into the graveyard. That includes the 4 lands. So we've seen this ability already on Mirko Vosk. It is the same as what Mirko Vosk does. So just a nice little way to get someone to mill quite a lot. Consuming Aberration, we've seen, makes each opponent mill until they hit a land. When we cast a spell, Enter the God Eternals can make anyone, including us if we want, mill 4 cards. Infernal Genesis has each player at the beginning of their upkeep mill the top card of their library, and then they get some minions based on the mana value of what they milled. Breach the Multiverse has every player mill 10, and Curse of Unbinding has the enchanted player mill until they hit a creature. We get to steal the creature, all the other cards they revealed stay in their graveyard. That covers our mill. Let's talk about our theft section. This is such an important section as a theme for our deck. So we've got about 1/8 of the deck is these cards. Starting with Synthesis Pod. This card is so cool in this deck. 3 and a Phyrexian blue, so we can either pay 3 generic mana and 2 life without having to spend any more mana, or we can pay 3 and a blue for an artifact that says for 1 and a Phyrexian blue, meaning just 1 mana if we're willing to spend life on it, and tap, and exile a spell you control. Spell means an object we control on the stack. So if we've cast a spell, before that spell resolves, we can activate Synthesis Pod and exile that spell from the stack, so it won't ever resolve. It'll just be in exile. And if we do that, target opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a card with mana value equal to 1 plus the exiled spell's mana value. Exile that card, then that player shuffles, and we may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So what this means is we are doing a birthing pod like impression of something on the stack. Imagine we do a little bit of damage to our commander when she's backside up. We then randomly get a huge spell from our hand and we get to cast it for free. It goes on the stack. Let's call it like a 6 mana spell, maybe. But we know one of our opponents is running some pretty big spells. So with that 6 mana spell in the stack, we pay a single generic mana, 2 life, and tap the Synthesis Pod, and we exile the spell that we just put on the stack that Rona let us cast without paying its mana cost, but is 6 generic mana. Our opponent that we target is going to have to flip cards over until they find something that is 7 generic, that has a mana value of 7. Then they exile that card, they shuffle their library, and we can cast the 7-drop for free. Pretty sweet. I think Synthesis Pod is really fun. It's a card that I'm sure it has homes in other decks. I just don't see it happening that often, because since you're having to pay for the synthesis pod and the spell you're casting, usually, like, how likely is it that you're going to get something better in your opponent's library than, something you could have just put in your own? But in this deck, because we care so much about Phyrexia, about stealing from our opponents, and about casting spells for free, it seems like a really good fit. So, Chainer Dementia Master lets us steal creatures from any graveyard, reanimating them as nightmares. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering lets us reanimate a creature or planeswalker from a graveyard. Staff of Eden, Vault's Key, when it enters, we get to get any legendary permanent from a graveyard onto the battlefield, and it also rewards us for controlling permanents we don't own, because we can tap it to draw cards equal to the number of those we have. Arvinox lets us exile the bottom card of each opponent's library at our end step, face down, and we get to cast them with our mana almost perfectly fixed for as long as they're exiled. Breach the Multiverse. After milling everyone for 10, we get to get a creature or planeswalker from each person's graveyard. Curse of Unbinding, of course, lets us get a creature from the enchanted player after in their upkeep they mill until they get to a creature. We just get to steal that creature. Kiora Best the Sea God, the second chapter ability, taps everything down, and then the third one lets us steal something. Any permanent. It could be a land. Maybe it will be. Mind's Annihilation lets us, every time any opponent casts a spell, if it's the first one they cast that turn, they exile the top card of their library, and we get to cast it if it's a spell. Virtue of Persistence, or rather, if the card is a non-land, because now we have lands that have adventures on them. So, non-land cards, we can cast those. Virtue of Persistence lets us reanimate something every turn from any graveyard. It's like Debtor's Knell. Afterlife from the Loam lets us reanimate a creature from each player's graveyard. Rise of the Dark Realms lets us reanimate every creature from all graveyards. And It That Betrays lets us steal any permanents that our opponents sacrifice that weren't already tokens. So that's our theft section. We have some Reanimate, just to group it together so we can see what's bringing creatures back from our graveyard. Chainer brings creatures back as nightmares. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering brings a creature back. Staff of Eden brings a legendary permanent back. Breach the Multiverse gets a creature or planeswalker from everyone's graveyard. Grave Betrayal gets creatures back at the end step that we didn't control when they die, if they died that turn, and they come back as zombies. Virtue of Persistence, again, reanimates something at the start of every one of our upkeeps. Afterlife from the Loam brings back one thing from each player's graveyard, and Rise of the Dark Realms gets everything from everyone's graveyards. It's nice to note with Rise of the Dark Realms, it just says all creatures. Even though if there are ones in there we don't want to get, sorry, we got them. The Dark Realms are rising. We might as well take what we can get. That covers our Reanimate section. We have one card in our Recursion section, which is right here, and it's Vohar. Vohar is the only card in the deck that lets us get back instants and sorceries, whereas Reanimating lets us get back permanents. So maybe worth thinking about. We are running 13 instants and sorceries total, so Vohar can help us with that. Next up is our Evasion section. These are cards that help us get past our opponent's defenses if we were to want to, like Midnight Charm, tapping down a creature, or giving one of our creatures first strike. Maybe tapping down a creature helps us evade their blockers. That's a possibility. Better is, of course, Archetype of Imagination, but it costs 6 times as much. By giving all of our creatures flying and having our opponent's creatures lose flying and be unable to gain or have flying. Endbringer can also make a creature unable to attack or block. And Kiora Best the Sea God can tap down all non-land permanents of our opponent that won't untap during their next untap step. That covers our Evasion section. We have a Protection section. We got a card in here that we haven't seen. It's Swiftfoot Boots. Love the Swifties. 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1, and it gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Haste is not super relevant in this deck, although if we get out the Swifties, and then we play Rona, and we've got an extra mana, we can just equip the Swifties to Rona and immediately loot with her. That seems pretty good. But particularly, we want to give her haste. And since I mentioned before, equipment is not going to fall off, like the same as an aura, when we transform our commander, being able to make the front side of Rona equipped with the Swiftfoot Boots means when we transform her to the backside, she will remain hexproof and hasty. We've also got Stormtide Leviathan, of course, which makes it so creatures without flying or island walk can't attack. And what has island walk? Well, it does. So, only thing that's going to be able to attack are flyers and the Leviathan, probably. Unless someone else is running, I don't know, an island walker. Maybe if someone's made a Dan commander deck, that would be pretty sweet. I could see a Rule 0 commander deck with Dan as the commander. It's not a good one, but you could do it. Anyway, go out there and play Dan if you're not playing commander. The last of these spell sections is our tokens section. These are ways for us to make tokens because we're stealing our opponent's creatures, but we want to have the access to a few extra things of our own. Acorn Catapult is a pinger that we're going to be shooting our commander with, but also making squirrels with. Yeah. Did we not see this in the removal section? We didn't. Let's go ahead and give this the removal tag as well, since all of our burn spells are there. Enter the God Eternals makes a 4/4, we get to amass 4 with it, so we get a 4/4 black zombie army creature token. Extravagant Replication makes a token copy of any non-land permanent we control at the start of our upkeep. So we can get creatures with this, but we can also get copies of, I don't know, Kioribus the Sea God, or Shark Typhoon, or Grave Titan. Grave Titan, which of course, when it enters or attacks, makes 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Infernal Genesis lets us and everyone else mill a card at our upkeep and make a bunch of 1/1 minions, which might just be fun. Shark Typhoon lets us make flying sharks with a variable power and toughness based on the mana value of a non-creature spell every time we cast one of those. And of course, Kioribus the Sea God makes us an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. So those are the ways we make tokens. And that covers all of the spells in this deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base as well, starting with our basics right here. We're running 20 basics, which is sort of where I normally go. It's not always the case, but it's what we're sticking with here. We're a little bit heavier on black than we are on blue, but it's pretty even. And of course, we're running Johannes Voss Dominaria United lands because this is a Rona deck. We're running Fetid Pools. Fetid Pools is a bicycle land, which means it can be cycled for 2. It comes in tapped, but it has 2 basic land types. It's an island and a swamp, so it taps for blue or black. So if we play this, it's a tap land. But while it's in our hand, we can pay 2 and discard it to draw a card by cycling it. So, bicycle. Just a nice way for us to have an extra card in the deck that happens to have the swamp type for if we have Dread Presence in play. Just nice to be able to do. There's another reason we have this in here as well. We'll get to it. We're running Dimir Aqueduct as well. This is a bounce land. If you haven't seen a bounce land, they enter tapped, and when they do, we have to bounce a land back to our hand. Return a land you control to its owner's hand. That means if this is the first land we play, then it's the only land we're able to bounce, so we have to bounce it. So we don't want to do that. The advantage of all this, though, is that it taps for 2 mana. 1 blue and 1 black every time we tap it. So the play pattern should be we have some basics in play or some other lands of some sort, and then we tap them for mana before we play the Dimir Aqueduct, so we get their mana out of them. Then we play the Aqueduct and bounce one of those to our hand, and then the next turn, the Aqueduct will tap for 2, meaning it taps for the mana that we lost from the land we lost, and then 1 for itself as well. Not only are we not behind on our mana production, but we definitely have a land in hand that we can now make our land drop next turn as well. So Dimir Aqueduct and all the bounce lands are really great for Commander. We're running Drowned Catacomb, which is one of the great reasons to run Fetid Pools. It's a check land. It taps for blue or black, and it comes in tapped unless we control an island or a swamp, which means we've got 20 of those in our deck. Oh, we have 21 because Fetid Pools is both an island and a swamp. So if it's in play, even if it's tapped, Drowned Catacomb will come in untapped. Pretty good. Speaking of catacombs, we have Darkwater Catacombs. This is a filter land. If we pay 1 and tap it, it makes a blue and a black. So that's 2 mana. But we do have to put 1 mana into it. So assuming we're tapping a land to do that, we're tapping 2 lands, that original one and the catacombs, to make 2 mana. So we're not actually accelerating ourselves, but we are getting both of our colors and filtering into that way. It's just worth recognizing Darkwater Catacombs on its own does not tap for mana unless we have a mana to put into it. We are running 6 fixing lands. Of course we're running Command Tower. It is, if you want to think of it this way, Arcane Signet as a tower, as a land. Comes in untapped, and it taps for 1 mana of any color and our commander's color identity. So it's an untapped dual land that taps for blue or black for us. Pretty alright. Path of Ancestry is a tapped dual. It comes in tapped, and it taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, so blue or black. But when we spend that mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. So Rona is a human wizard. On the front side, we have 4 other humans and 4 other wizards. There may be some overlap there, but anytime we cast any of those while Rona's face up, or when we cast Rona, because Rona shares creature types with herself, of course, we'll get that scry. And then, when Rona is flipped to her backside, Rona is a Phyrexian wizard. We have 4 Phyrexians in the deck besides Rona, or including Rona, I should say. So, Path of Ancestry will give us scries for Phyrexians when Rona's back face up, and humans when humans when Rona's front face is up, or when we're casting Rona. And will give us scries for wizards either way. Just in case, I want you to know, I did check the rules about this. It does matter which side is face up. Path of Ancestry will not give us a scry when we cast a creature that shares a type with Rona's back face, unless Rona's back face is face up at the time. Just so you know. Temple of the False God is next. This is a soul land, and I think these cards are... This is a great card. I know some people don't love it. It taps for 2 colorless mana, just like a Soul Ring, but only if we control 4 lands besides it, so 5 lands total. That means it's not great for us early game, but once we have 4 other lands, Temple of the False God cost us 1 land drop, and it's making 2 mana, so that's just ramp. It's just not early ramp. Pretty good. We're also running 3 fixing lands. Maestro's Theater and Obscura Storefront in this deck are the same card. So the way this works is these lands come in untapped, and when they do, we sacrifice them immediately. When we do that, we get to search our library for a basic plains, island, or swamp, put it on the battlefield tapped, shuffle, and we gain a life. But there are no plains in this deck. But because it doesn't actually have a white mana symbol on it, this doesn't violate the commander color identity rules. So this just says, search for an island or a swamp, put it on the battlefield tapped, shuffle, gain a life. So it's sort of like Evolving Wilds, or one of those fetch lands that automatically sacrifices itself because we typically don't need to get things off the top of our library and therefore hold up the ability to crack a fetch. Maestro's Theater is exactly the same card, but instead of a plains, it can also find a mountain. But in our deck, we're only finding islands or swamps. So both are a nice way for us to make sure we get exactly the color we need, and maybe a tiny little bit of life as well. Finally, we have Myriad Landscape. It comes in tapped, and it taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic lands that share a land type. So in this deck, 2 islands or 2 swamps. Then, we put them on the battlefield tapped, and we shuffle. These have to be basic land cards. That's not Fetid Pools. Fetid Pools is a non-basic that has basic types. These have to be actual basic swamps or basic islands in our deck. And though those come in tapped, and we have to pay 2, tap, and sack this to do that, and this comes in tapped on its own, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get those 2 lands, but we did make 1 land drop with the Myriad Landscape, and eventually end up with 2 lands in play, so even though it's slow, it is ramp. Next up is Underground River. This is a pain land. It is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can tap it for blue or black if we're willing to have it do damage to us. This is the same thing as the Talisman we had earlier, but on a land. Again, same thing's true. If we have to take damage to get the colored pips, it's worth it to do so. All the rest of the time, we just tap it for colorless and don't worry about it. We are running a pathway in this deck. This is the Clearwater Pathway. It comes in untapped and it taps for blue, unless we play it on the backside, and it's Murkwater Pathway and it comes into untapped and taps for black. We get to choose when it comes in, and we don't get to choose that again unless we happen to get it back into our hand. How could we do that? Well, we have a bounce land in this deck. So it may not be something relevant to us, but if we need it for black mana, we can play it as the Murkwater Pathway. And then if we happen to get our Dimir Aqueduct into play, we can bounce the Murkwater pathway. It's back in our hand. And when we play it again, we can play it on the front side as Clearwater pathway. Now it makes blue. So just a little bit of an interaction that may not come up in every game, but when it does, you're going to feel smart. Next is Temple of Deceit. This is a scry land. It enters tapped. We can, when it does, it lets us scry 1 just on enter. And of course it taps for both of our colors. So this is not going to give us as many scries as Path of Ancestry, but it gives us a guaranteed scry the turn it comes in. So that's pretty good. And we have Sunken Hollow. This is a Tango land. It is also, like Fetid Pools, an island and a swamp, which is to say we have one more card in this deck that our check land will be able to care about. We have 22 lands in this deck that will let our Drowned Catacombs come in untapped. Pretty nice. Sunken Hollow itself taps for blue or black, but unlike the Fetid Pools, it only comes in tapped if we don't control 2 or more basic lands. So that means if we have an island and a swamp, basic island and a basic swamp, or 2 basic islands or 2 basic swamps, if any of those 3 situations are the case, when we play the Hollow comes in untapped as well. So we get an untapped duel, and that's pretty great. So before I go into the utility lands, I'm going to talk about the upgrade paths. If we wanted, we could replace this Sunken Hollow with a slow land. The slow land is Shipwreck Marsh. It says the same thing as Sunken Hollow, except it says 2 or more lands, not just basics. So it'll come in untapped probably any time it's turn 3 or later. That's also a nice replacement for just our Drowned Catacomb itself, even though I think this is pretty set up in this deck. If we wanted to replace the Catacomb or the Filter land, we could do so with a Watery Grave, the Shock land. It's a typed duel that it's very likely to come in untapped, because it only comes in tapped if we want it to, if we're not willing to pay the 2. Finally, is we could upgrade our Temple of Deceit to the Undercity Sewers Surveil land, because that not only has the basic types, the same way that Sunken Hollow has basic types, but when it enters, it lets us Surveil, which is a little more powerful than Scry, especially in a deck like ours, which may care about the graveyard. Last of all, we have 4 utility lands in this deck. Demolition Field is a card I run in many of my decks, just because while a lot of people don't like land destruction or land denial, if they call it that, you have to have one answer. Something that can take care of a problematic land, like a Rogue's Passage that your Voltron opponent is using to attack you unblockably, or a Glacial Chasm that's just stopping anyone from beating that player at all. Demolition Field comes in untapped and taps for colorless. We can also pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that our opponent controls. They then get to search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped and shuffle. And so do we. So neither of us are down a land. We just have basics instead of our non-basics, assuming we had any basics left in our library, and we will. So Demolition Field is a one of in our deck for land destruction, but worth it in case we need an answer to something that's dangerous or problematic. We're running Minas Morgul Dark Fortress. This is a legendary land, so it's not a legendary spell, but it is legendary, so just enjoy that. It enters tapped, and it taps for black, but we can also pay 3 and a black and tap it to put a shadow counter on target creature. For as long as that creature has a shadow counter on it, it's a wraith in addition to its other types. Shadow counter is a keyword ability counter. That creature can only block and be blocked by creatures with shadow. So unless someone else has a Minas Morgul, most players aren't running shadow creatures. Sometimes you see them occasionally, but without it, it means that creature is now unblockable by anything. So this is a nice way for us to get in with our commander and maybe do some commander damage, or with one of our really big beaters without being able to be blocked. It just is worth recognizing that it can't itself block unless another creature has shadow. Rogue's Passage is next. We talked about this a moment ago. It comes in untapped and taps for colorless, or we could pay for it and tap it to make a creature unblockable this turn. That's just this turn. versus the shadow counter on Minas Morgul for every turn. Of course, unblockable by anything that isn't itself a creature with shadow. But Rogue's Passage is a nice way for us to push some damage, especially if we end up winning with commander damage, which might be the case. Finally, Terrain Generator is a land that comes in untapped and taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2 and tap it to put a basic land card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. We're running 20 basics, so if we have land in our hand, it's pretty likely that it will be a basic. Terrain Generator lets us get it out of our hand and into play. The reason that's important is because Rona, on her backside, exiles a card from our hand at random when we do some damage to her. If it's a land, we get to put it onto the battlefield, but we want it to be a spell as much as we're able to. So if we're able to get any basics that may be in our hand out with Terrain Generator, or of course making land drops with them, that means we have fewer cards in hand that are lands, and maybe all of our cards therefore are spells, so Rona's not going to hit a land when we randomly get to exile something from our hand with her. So yeah, that about sums it up. Again, I'm making a deck for each of the March of the Machine legends, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or deck style. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, as always, magic is fun. You should play more Magic.